Good morning, welcome back. Today is September 12th, and we're going to talk about Isaiah 41 through 43, I think, today. Kind of don't exactly know how far I'm going to get. But before we get there, let's talk about some of the things that happened on this date. First of all, it was on this date in 490 BC that the Battle of Marathon occurred. The Battle of Marathon. This was between the Greeks, that is the Athenians, and the Persians. And the Athenians won. Miltiades was the general, very huge victory. The Athenians were outnumbered, and they won the battle. Now, there's a legend about this particular battle that after the battle, a guy named Phidippides, or sometimes it's spelled Philippides, was told to run from the battle site to Athens to let them know. And it happened to be about 26 miles long, 25, 26 miles. And so he went there, announced that they had won, and promptly died. And that's the legend on which the idea of running a marathon is based, even though that's not exactly the true story. I know, you're shocked. Are you telling me that some historical legend isn't true? Yeah, pretty much. That's not exactly how it occurred. The guy wasn't, there was a story about a guy, Herodotus reports a guy running from Marathon to Sparta to ask for help, and that's about 140 miles, and Sparta was not able to help or did not help in time, and then it was 25 or so miles from Athens to Marathon, but Phidippides didn't run that distance and he didn't die at the end. But why should we let the truth get in the way of a good shtick when it comes to creating Olympic events? But that was on this date in 490. In 1771, Francis Asbury left England for the British colonies, or what we would call today the U.S. We talked about Asbury earlier, very interesting guy. I recently read a biography about him. He was a Methodist missionary to British North America, and at the outbreak of hostilities with the colonialists, the Revolutionary War, every British Anglican or Wesleyan Methodist missionary was went home, except for Asbury. And Asbury stayed and basically created the Methodist Church in the United States. So, in 1792, the court-martial trial began for the instigators of the mutiny on the Bounty, the HMS Bounty, the ship that was with Captain Bligh and all of that. Pretty interesting story. I read it many years ago, and of course I've seen one or two of the movies. I know there's one, I think, with Gregory Peck, and there's one with Marlon Brando, and I think there's one with Mel Gibson. So there's at least three to choose from. And then you can find out about Pitcairn Island. Look that up and find out what that has to do with the bounty. But that's an interesting story. In 1910, Gustav Mahler's 8th Symphony premiered with 1,028 musicians. That's a lot of musicians, okay? I'm just saying that's a lot of musicians. I don't know that I've ever heard Mahler's 8th Symphony, or at least not that I know of. I certainly have never heard anything with 1,000 musicians. But regardless. In 1958, the U.S. government ordered the Central High School in Little Rock to integrate. That official order came on this date in 1958. And in 1960, John F. Kennedy, in a presidential campaign speech, declared that he did not speak for the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church did not speak for him, which is kind of interesting because for a number of reasons. First of all, John Kennedy was the first Catholic elected president. He was not the first Catholic candidate. That would have been Alf Smith in the 1920s. But that was one of the issues of the campaign. And it's still kind of an issue because now in the United States we have the second Catholic president, elected Catholic president. And it's an ongoing issue about the relationship between his faith and what he supports and things like that. So again, but that was on this date in 1960. And I believe the speech was in West Virginia. Before the West Virginia primary, West Virginia being a very Protestant area, and he went on to win that particular primary. In 1966, it was on this day that we saw them here they came, walking down the street, getting the funniest looks from everyone they met. Yes, that's right. It was on this date in 1966 that the TV show The Monkees premiered. You know, the prefab four, as it were. And I know some of you are thinking, you've all seen the show. You know what I'm talking about. But that premiered on this date in 1966. Born on this date includes Henry Hudson, born on this date in 1575, an English explorer. Things like the Hudson Bay and Hudson River are named for him. Mostly did his work up in the northern part of the British colonies, what we call Canada today. In 1880, H.L. Mencken was born. H.L. Mencken, Henry Louis Mencken, I think, a newspaper columnist, writer, lover of the English language. Worked mostly in Baltimore for the Baltimore Sun. Very interesting writer, kind of a precursor to like a Mike Royko, for those in the Chicago area who've been around for a while. But a great, very cynical, and very much of the time. That is, the 1920s was when he peaked. If you've ever heard about the Scopes trial, and that is where you had John Scopes, and then you had Clarence Darrow and Teaching of Evolution, and William Jennings Bryan, and all of that kind of stuff. One of the reasons why it was such became such a laughing stock for evangelicalism or Protestantism at the time was because of H.L. Mencken, because he was also there. Mencken was famous for the pithy word and statement. He's the one who said, for any job that exists or for any challenge, something, and I'm paraphrasing here, for any challenge that exists in the world, there's a solution that's easy, simple, and wrong. And he's the one who says a cynic is somebody who, when he smells the flowers, looks for the coffin, kind of thing. And he's the one, and my favorite Mencken quotation is this, that Puritanism is the haunting fear that someone, somewhere, might be happy. That was H.L. Mencken wrote that. And finally, in 1916, Tony Bettenhausen, the race car driver's scion, or I should say the starter of the Bettenhausen family of race car drivers, was born on this date in 1916. Now, normally that would not be a big deal to me, except for the fact that I found out that he was born in Tinley Park, Illinois, which is just that direction, if you really want to know. I don't know if there's a placard where he is born or not, but it was on this date in 1916 that he was born. All right, well, let's get back to talking about Isaiah. We're into that second section from chapter 40 through chapter 55, where the prophet is dealing with the people in captivity. And today we're going to talk about, or begin talking about, the case against idols or idol worship. So let's get back to that. Good morning, welcome back. We're here today to talk about Isaiah 41 through 43. That's my goal. And it may not seem so to those of you listening, but we are actually approaching the end of Isaiah. Today I want to cover 3 chapters, a lot of stuff there. I'm going to take some time on 53, 54, and 55 for obvious reasons. Those are fairly well-known passages. Then I want to zip through the rest because, again, I don't want to take a long time getting lost in the details of the book. So that's my goal. I hope to be done with Isaiah surely by the end of the year, by Christmas, or maybe even by Thanksgiving. I don't know. We'll see how quickly I move. And in case you're interested, what I'm planning to do next, because I have every intention of keeping up with this. What I want to do next is I want to talk about the writings of Luke, and that is I'm going to look at Luke and Acts together, and you'll see how that's going to work out. Usually we look at Luke or we look at Acts, and we don't think of them as a single unit because John is sort of stuck in the middle of them. But they are actually 2 parts, maybe like 2 volumes, maybe a part 1 and a part 2. We'll kind of talk about that. And then I thought today, or the other day, I was looking around, and my decisions as far as what books I want to study are often based on things like looking on my bookshelf and going, oh wait, I have a commentary on that book, and I've never read it. And I realized that I have a commentary on Ecclesiastes. So I think after Luke and Acts, I am going to dive into Ecclesiastes because I have never done a study of Ecclesiastes before. And I don't think I've ever been in a study of Ecclesiastes before. So, something to look forward to. But meanwhile, let's get back into Isaiah. Now, remember what we were talking about last week. We said that 1 through 39 is believed to be addressed to those that are contemporaries of Isaiah, those facing residents of the kingdom of Judah, facing these existential threats, either from Syria or Assyria or Egypt or Persia or any of these various countries, okay, and how they deal with them and all of that. That's kind of the story of chapters 1 through 39. Chapters 40 through 55, the so-called second Isaiah, deals with messages to Israel in captivity. Another way to look at this, and as I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today, is kind of like, Isaiah is saying to the people of Israel, saying, listen, there's still some issues you guys need to work on. And here's what they are, okay? So you need to work on these issues. Okay, so that's 40 through 55 or so, and 55 through the end of the book are to those on return. And we'll get to those when we get to chapter 55, 56. Okay, so, and last week we talked about chapter 40, very well-known chapter, a lot of well-known passages, greatest hits of Isaiah. And it was this idea of, is God going to redeem them? So put yourself in the mind of the original readers or the original recipients of these messages. And that is this, that now they're in captivity. Okay, so these are messages directed toward those who are in captivity. And those that are in captivity, the question of their existence has been taken care of. Or I should say their immediate existence, okay? The nations have come and they've taken them over. Okay, now it's like, oh wait, yeah, I exist as a person who is of Jewish descent, but I no longer have a country. So is there a future for my people group? And these are kind of the questions that are facing. And the questions we asked and the three questions that were answered in Isaiah 40 were that question of, does God want to, will he, can he restore Israel? And the answers were clearly yes, he can, he will. But as we get into chapter 41, especially going through 43, we're going to see the Lord kind of like saying, okay, I'm going to make a case against these idols that you guys keep falling into. Now, side note, or one of my commentaries that I'm looking at calls them excursus. An excursus. Okay. One of the things that you know about the history of Israel, or that becomes clear as you read the Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, again, Kings and Chronicles, fairly similar, but as you read these stories, you realize that for a number of reasons, and I don't want to get into them right now, Israel had a huge problem with idolatry. That every time you turned around, the Israelites are chasing Baal or Dagon or one of these other Ashdod, and one of these other heathen gods. It's like at the drop of the hat. It's like, guys, can you at least be consistent for a year? But every time you turn around, they're chasing after one of these guys. And now, so when they get into the captivity, one of the things that the big picture history tells us, that when they get back from the captivity, after they return, and I'm kind of getting into the historical element of this, that whole idolatry thing is pretty much taken care of. So like when Jesus is wandering around Palestine, idolatry in the classic, Baal worship kind of sense isn't an issue for the Jews anymore. Okay, they've finally gotten to become the monotheists that God wanted them to be from Abraham on. Okay, and part of it is here now here Isaiah is telling the people of Israel, okay, you really need to deal with this idolatry thing. And here I'm going to just write a series of messages. And again, keep in mind, our ongoing discussion on how Isaiah is put together, and that is that these are a series of statements, writings, sermons, things that someone long after Isaiah put together. Okay, not, I mean, if you want to believe that Isaiah put it together, okay, great, okay. But I think most scholars believe that it was done sometime after, just like with Psalms, just like with Genesis. Somebody after the fact put it together and said, okay, these are the writings of Genesis, these are the writings of Moses, these are the Psalms of David, these are the writings of Isaiah. Okay, so there isn't necessarily that clear continuity that we like to see. And so that kind of, as 21st century Western linear thinkers, but so keep that in mind as we look at these passages, because sometimes it's like, well, he's here, and all of a sudden here, we're back here, and here. There doesn't seem to be this logical consistency because it's not that kind of book. So, all right, let's start with chapter 41, beginning with verse 1. We'll talk about the case against idolatry. We'll start building the case against idolatry. Listen to me in silence, O coastlands. Let the peoples renew their strength. Let them approach. Let them speak. Let us together draw near for judgment. Now, when Isaiah uses this idea of coastlands, okay, there's some argument as far as what exactly he's talking about, but I think the best explanation is he's just trying to say the edge of the earth. The coastlands that's as far as you can go, okay? After that, it's the sea, okay? So bring everybody in. He says, okay, let's all come in. Let's all talk about this. Let's all come together. Let's all talk about this, okay? Who stirred up one from the east? Okay, who stirred up one from the east? Okay, now let me say something here. I was going to say it later, but let me put it in here. Okay, one of the arguments that God is going to make is that, or that Isaiah is going to make on God's behalf, is that God acts in history. Okay, that is his thing, so to speak. Okay. A lot of the theology of the pagan gods was not that God came in and personally did stuff. Okay, that's one of the things that principles you get through all of the Old Testament, and that is, the technical term is that God is a God who does stuff. Okay, I know you want to use these technical terms. God is a God who does stuff. Okay, and here he's saying, here he's talking about who did this. Okay, who stirred this one up from the east? This is in contrast to the traditional, typical theology of a lot of these pagan gods, and that was kind of a circle of life sort of thing. Okay, I know we've all seen The Lion King, the circle of life. We're all singing the song. Okay, but the role of these pagan gods often was to simply maintain this circle of life, and by maintaining this circle of life, things would happen. Okay, now when you're in that sort of a dynamic, you can only do what is in that circle of life. Okay, and so the idea of doing something new, breaking out, thinking outside of the box, so to speak, it is unheard of as far as these traditional pagan theologies are. And so several times through 41 through 43, we're going to see God, through Isaiah, saying, listen, I'm going to do something new. I'm breaking out of this cycle to show you something new. And here's the first time he does that. Okay. Who stirred up one from the east, whom victory meets at every step? He gives up nations before him, so that he tramples kings underfoot. He makes them like dust with his sword, like driven stubble with his bow. He pursues them and passes on safely, by paths his feet have not trod. Who has performed and done this, calling the generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am he. Okay. Now in verse 2 here, it says, who stirred up one from the east? Who's he talking about? Now this is a little tricky. Now some commentators, including John Calvin, side note, John Calvin wrote a commentary, I think, on definitely every book of the New Testament. I don't know about the Old Testament. He might have. But I know every book of the New Testament except for Revelation. Okay, for whatever reason, he didn't like Revelation. But John Calvin wrote a commentary on every book of the New Testament except for Revelation, and several of the books, including Isaiah, of the Old Testament. Okay, And Calvin, among others, look at this person from the east and say, oh, that's Abraham. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, that you can believe that. And a lot of good people have said that this is the person. And so God is saying, listen, I brought, according to this approach as far as who that guy from the east is, I brought Abraham into existence. I brought the nation of Israel. I'm the guy who came out, did this new thing, and brought these people in. Okay. The trouble with that, and with one minor exception, and I'm assuming, again, I know this is very insider, talking about what we know about Abraham, that really there's only one example in Genesis, the Genesis story of Abraham, where Abraham takes 318 men and goes and rescues Lot, and there's a military battle that Abraham is involved in, and that's really the only military adventure that we know about Abraham. Okay, same person. And here, this description seems to be a little more elaborate. Okay, he gives up nations. Where am I? Okay, who stirred up one from the east, whom victory meets at every step. Okay, that sounds more like a real conquering hero. Okay, so others look at this and say, no, we're talking about Cyrus the Persian. Okay, who we're going to come up against especially in chapter 44, which is going to be next week. But regardless, so it's looking at this Persian army. Now, which is it? Okay, I don't really know. I think there's a good arguments to go both ways here. And the one thing is what really makes it tricky. I liked, oh yeah, Cyrus. Oh, absolutely. Until later on, looking at two commentaries where we talk about stirring up somebody from the north, and I go, oh well, that's Cyrus too. And it's like, make up your mind. Is he from the north? Is he from the east? I'm sorry, I digress. We'll get back to that. All right, so God is talking about idols, and he's saying, listen, let me remind you what I've done. Okay, I stirred up one from the east. He gives up nations before him so that he tramples. I'm sorry, who stirred up one from the east, whom victory meets at every step? Now, describing this person, he gives up nations before him so that he tramples kings underfoot. He makes them like dust. Who did all of this? End of verse 4. I, the Lord, the first, and with the last am he. Okay, so again, I think New Testament link, I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. Alpha being the first letter of the Greek alphabet, Omega being the last. Just an idea. Okay, verse 5. The coastlands have seen and are afraid. The ends of the earth tremble. They have drawn near and come. Okay, so what are these nations' response? What are these far-flung nations' response? Okay, verse 6. Everyone helps his neighbor and says to his brother, be strong. Well, yeah, that sounds pretty good, right? I mean, what's wrong with that? But we take it a step further and see be strong doing what? Verse 7. The craftsman strengthens the goldsmith, and he who smooths with the hammer, him who strikes the anvil, saying of the soldering, it is good, and they strengthen it with nails that cannot be moved. So they're making an idol. So the reaction to this is to go to their idols. Okay? Now let's go to verse 8. But you, Israel, my servant. Now here, this is the first time that Isaiah links servant with Israel. That Israel is God's servant. That Israel is there to do God's work. Now this is tricky because servant is used multiple times throughout Isaiah, and it doesn't always mean the nation of Israel. And sometimes we can look at that, and we'll get into a couple of those today. But keep that in mind here. And again, it isn't necessarily true that what Isaiah is talking about in 41 and 42 were meant by Isaiah to be put together. You see what I'm saying here? That these are two passages that could have been at two different times, and later somebody put it together and said, okay, these two go together. Okay. But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corner, saying to you, you are my servant, I have chosen you and not cast off. Fear not. So verses 8 through 10 are kind of like, look what I did for you. Verse 10, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand. Okay? Now, here's the interesting question here. Now, this is seems like a great promise. Well, yeah, who wouldn't want that as their life verse, right? The problem here is a problem with a lot of the Old Testament passages, and that is that this is a collective promise. Okay? God is not talking, Isaiah, I should say, God through Isaiah, is not talking to an individual. He's talking to the nation of Israel. Okay? So this is a collective promise to the nation of Israel. And he's saying that I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Okay? Look at it this way. Suppose you were in an army and somebody came out. So you're in an army. You're in an army of, 10,000 soldiers. Okay, so you're in an army of 10,000 soldiers and you're about to go into battle. And somebody, and you believe him or her, is able to come down and say, look, it's going to be a vicious battle. It's going to be a bloody battle. Okay? But I guarantee, and you believe him or her, I guarantee you will win. You will be victorious. We will take the day. Okay? So that is a promise you can take to the bank. We will take the day. Because, maybe it's like you're going up against a force that is much smaller. So it's just a given. Now, that's not always the case. Again, with the Battle of Marathon, there were more Persians than there were Athenians, and yet the Athenians won. Okay, so there you go. So it isn't always that case, but just suppose, again, this is a thought exercise. So, you can guarantee, you're going to win. Okay, the army is going to win. I guarantee it, the army is going to win. Now, you, individual soldier, you can claim that promise. You can say, yes, I claim that promise. The army is going to win. Okay? But the fact remains, you as a soldier may not survive. Okay? So again, keep that. That's kind of the distinction when we're talking about these collective promises in the Old Testament, where God says to the nation of Israel, hey, I promise that I'm going to do this great thing for you. And we in 21st century individualistic Western Christianity like to say, hey, that's a verse for me. No, it's not. It's a verse for the collective. Now, you individually may die a horrible, painful death on the battlefield. But the army is going to win. Can you see the distinction I'm making? So we want to be careful looking at Old Testament passages. And I know this is like to a certain extent, I'm beating a dead horse here, but again, there's a lot of passages, for example, that are talked about, that are collective promises that people like to take as individuals. But okay, now again, beginning with verse 11, I'm going to say, behold, he's still talking about what's going to happen to those who oppose Israel. Behold, all who are incensed against you shall be put to shame and confounded. Those who strive against you shall be as nothing and shall perish. You shall seek those who contend with you, but you shall not find them. Those who war against you shall be as nothing at all. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, fear not. I am the one who helps you. Reminding Israel who their gods are. Now, there's kind of a little shift here in verse 14. Fear not, you worm Jacob, you men of Israel, you little people. I am the one who helps you, declares the Lord. Your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. Now, here we have this passage, or this phrase, the Holy One of Israel, that is fairly common in, we talked about it, common in Isaiah. But this is the first time that we see the Lord being referred to as a Redeemer. Now, it's interesting because Redeemer has a couple of different meanings. Okay, now when we think of the word Redeemer, we're oftentimes, those of us in the church, we think of Ruth. We think of the kinsman redeemer, the buyer back. Okay, but the word that's translated Redeemer is translated in other ways. So in Numbers 35, there's a passage there talking about what happens when somebody is killed accidentally and somebody else goes to avenge the blood. Well, that avenger of the blood word, that's the same word. So that's the Redeemer. Okay, now, in English we translated avenger, but it's the same Hebrew word. Okay, and here when God is talking about being the Redeemer, he's like, hey, I'm the one that's going to go out there and do the avenging for you. Behold, I make of you a threshing sledge, new, sharp, and having teeth. You shall thresh the mountains and crush them, and you shall make the hills like chaff. You shall winnow them, and the wind shall carry them away, and the tempest shall scatter them. And you shall rejoice in the Lord, in the Holy One of Israel you shall glory. Okay, so again, this is this success that you're going to get. Verse 17. When the poor and needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on the bare heights and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water, and the dry land springs of water. Okay, again, here's it. We've talked about this before, and this is not the first time that this image has come up. This idea of giving water. Okay, so when the poor and needy, now this is just sort of like a general idea of helplessness. When they seek water and there's none, I, the Lord, will answer them. Okay, now think back, you wonder in Matthew 25 when Jesus says to, separating the sheep and the goats, and they says, put the sheep on one end and the goats on the other, and he says, well, when did we see you? So when you gave a cup of water in my name, you did it to me. I think might be leaning on this particular image, but it's like I'm gonna provide for the poor, because again, that's in verse in chapter 1, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. Okay, this whole idea, correct oppression. They can't get to it; it's blocked from them. Help them out. In verse 19. I will put in the wilderness the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle, and the olive. I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane, and the pine together. Now, interesting, in verse 19 here, 7 types of trees were mentioned. Okay, 7 types of trees. So if you're like a strong numerologist, you're like going nuts on this. So what does it mean that he uses 7 types of trees? I'll tell you what it means. Nothing. It means he just uses 7 types of trees. Now, these are trees that are typical of the area, not necessarily Babylon, but again, it's just coincidence that it's 7. Don't get too. But he says, I'm going to put them there that they may see and know, may consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this. The Holy One of Israel has created it. So he's going to put these trees in so that the trees will see this. Now, later on, we're going to get to an interesting passage in Isaiah 55. The trees of the field will clap their hands. Okay, again, there's a song about that. Again, so here, so I'm going to put these trees in so the trees will see it. Okay. Now, in verse 21, here, God is really going to get down, and Isaiah is going to get down. Okay, let's talk about this idolatry issue. Let's get to this idolatry issue. Set forth your case, says the Lord. Bring your proof, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring them, and tell us what is to happen. Tell us the former things, what they are, that we may consider them, that we may know their outcome, or declare to us the things to come. Tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Do good or do harm, that we may be dismayed and terrified. Behold, you are nothing, and your work is less than nothing. An abomination is he who chooses you. So we're back here to talking about these idols. And the Lord is saying, look, bring them out. Bring out your idols and ask them a couple of questions here. Okay? And in fact, ask them 3 things. Ask them, tell us what the future is. Verse 22, tell them and tell us what is to happen. Tell us the future. Okay? Or secondly, tell us the past and how it worked out. Or 3, do something tangible. Do good, do harm. Okay, so again, it's like do something. Bring your idols out and do something. This kind of reminds me of Elijah on Mount Baal, where he throws it down. He's a throwdown to the prophets of Baal. Say, hey, tell you got to do something. Waiting. And here the Lord is doing the same thing. Bring your gods out. Tell them, have they ever predicted the future? Okay, have they ever explained the past? Or can they look at the past and show how they predicted that and how it came about? Can they do anything? Can they do good? Can they do harm? No. What good are they? Verse 24 there, an abomination is he who chooses you. Verse 25, I stirred up one from the north, and he has come from the rising of the sun, and he shall call upon my name. He shall trample on rulers as mortar, as the potter treads clay. Okay, now here, this one from the north. Okay, now this is apparently not a prophecy because it's in the past tense. I stirred up one from the north. All right. Now, the explanation, remember we talked about stirring up one from the east. And the idea is that Babylon is from the north and Persia is from the east. So that's how, you get around this. Okay, I don't know. It's a little confusing. And I don't have a good explanation for it at this point. It's one of the interesting things about this. You don't necessarily have to have a good explanation. But he says, I stirred up one from the north and he has come. And now verse 26, who declared it from the beginning that we might know him beforehand, that we might say he is right. Now the Lord is saying, I stirred this up. I said it was going to happen. Who did this? Did you guys do it? No, I did. So who's the legitimate God? Not your idols, me. Again, God is making the case against idols to the people in Babylon so that they will look and say, listen, your idols have done nothing for you. Okay? There was none who declared it, none who proclaimed, none who heard your words. I, God, was the first to say in Zion, behold, here they are. And I give to Jerusalem a herald of good news. This is kind of a big picture idea. But when I look, there is no one. Among these idols, there is no answer. Who, when I ask, gives an answer? Behold, again, the big conclusion here for this chapter on these idols. Behold, they are all a delusion. Their works are nothing. Their metal images are empty wind. Back to this whole futility of idols. Okay? All right, moving into chapter 42. It's kind of a shift. Okay, and again, we're talking about a servant here. In chapter 42, this is going to begin the first of what's called a servant song. There's actually 4 of them in Isaiah, 4 servant songs, where Isaiah just stops and talks about or gives a hymn of sort about this servant that is going to come to the Lord. And I will tell you ahead of time, the 4th servant song is Isaiah 53, okay, where born our griefs, carried our sorrows, wounded for our transgressions, all that. Okay, that's in chapter 53. Okay, but this is the first of the servant songs. Verse 1, chapter 42, verse 1. Behold my servant who I uphold, my chosen in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. Okay. This is interesting here in verse 3, it says, in whom my soul delights. Okay, so who is this servant talking about? Okay, we don't know specifically. Okay, based on the context and what's later said, we're not talking about servant in the sense of Israel. Remember we said earlier Israel is referred to as a servant. Now there's a different reference to a servant. What servant is this? Okay, well, we don't know. It's not explicitly said, and there isn't a clear tie-in. However, there are some indications. For example, in Matthew 3, when Jesus is baptized, okay, what does the Spirit say after he's baptized in a voice from heaven saying, this is my Son whom I love, with him I am well pleased. Okay, behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen, this is Isaiah, in whom my soul delights. Okay, I have put my Spirit upon him, so the Spirit descend. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. Kind of talking about the gentleness of his approach. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be discouraged till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands, these far-reaching areas, wait for his law. Thus says God the Lord. Verse 5, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it. Side note, if you're creating a doctrinal theology of creation, you're going to come to this verse. Who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it, and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind. Okay, again, we've talked about this physical healing. This is not the first time this has come up in Isaiah. To bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, those who sit in darkness. Now again, this comes up quite a bit. This kind of idea that I'm going to give eyesight to the blind and release the prisoners, etc., etc. And of course, it peaks kind of in chapter, I think it's 61, and then it's later quoted by Jesus in Luke chapter 4, where he says, today this is
done in your presence, okay? I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my glory I give to no other, nor my praise to carved idols. Okay, so what I did, idols don't get the credit for this. Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things, getting back to that circle thing, new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Okay, so God, am able to tell the future. How are your idols doing on that? Not very good, eh? Verse 10. Let's see. So here we clearly have a shift. Okay, again, is it a different subject, a different writing, whatever? But there's clearly a shift. Okay, verse 10. Sing to the Lord a new song, His praise from the end of the earth. You who go down to the sea and all that fills it. Now again, this could be placed in that as a result of all that's happened before. This is why you need to sing a song. All that the Lord said that He is going to do for Israel, all that He is going to do with His servant. Sing the Lord a new song. You go down to the sea and all that fills it, the coastlands and their inhabitants. Let the desert and its cities lift up their voice. The villages that Kedar inhabits. Kedar is like the second son of Ishmael. And it's kind of like talking about like the Arabian desert. In contrast to, let the inhabitants of Selah sing for joy. Now these are either just the mountains in general, Selah referring to the mountains in general, or that is the ancient name for what we call Petra today. Petra. I've been to Israel, but we never went to Petra. You know, you've seen the pictures where there's these huge rocks and people walk through the cracks in them. Let them give glory to the Lord and declare His praise in the coastlands. The Lord goes out like a mighty man, like a man of war. He stirs up His zeal. Here's God as the warrior motif. He cries out. He shouts aloud. He shows Himself mighty against His foes. Verse 14. For a long time here's God. For a long time I have held my peace. I have kept still and restrained myself. Now, so again, you know, the Lord worked through prophets. He worked through different means, and now and all that time to Him, He's like, listen, I've been quiet. Now I'm going to make some noise. Okay, now I'm going to make some noise. Now I will cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and paint. I will gasp and pant. Okay, just again, you know, this idea of and you know the image of a woman in labor and the noise and the sounds of what's going on there. Okay, this is the kind of noise I'm going to make. It's going to be that noticeable. Okay, it's going to be that abrupt. Okay. I will lay waste mountains and hills and dry up all the vegetations. I will turn the rivers into islands. Now, how do you turn a river into an island? Well, you stop the flow, and then all of a sudden, okay, and dry up the pools, and I will lead the blind in a way they do not know. Okay. Now, earlier He's going to open the eyes of the blind in a positive sense. Here, this is in terms of judgment. In paths that they have not known, I will guide them. I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. These are things I do, and I do not forsake them. They are turned back. Again, final shot at these idol worshippers. And they are turned back and utterly put to shame, who trust in carved idols, who say to metal images, you are our gods. Okay, this is just pointless to even trust these guys. Hear you deaf, verse 18, and look blind, and look you blind that you may see. Who is blind but my servant? Okay, now we're back to talk about Israel as a servant. Or deaf as my messenger whom I send. Who is blind as my dedicated one? Or blind as the servant of the Lord? Again, talking about Israel. He sees many things but does not observe them. His ears are open but he does not hear. Okay? And I think here this is sort of the fulfillment. God is coming down on what He said was going to happen in Isaiah 6. You know, you're going to be preaching and you're going to preach, but they're not going to pay attention. And now He's saying, hey, here it is. The Lord was pleased for His righteousness' sake to magnify His law and make it glorious. The Lord's like, I was there all along. But this is a people plundered and looted. They are all of them trapped in holes and hidden in prisons. They have become plunder with none to rescue, spoil with none to say restored. Who among you will give ear to this? Who will attend and listen for the time to come? Okay, this is where you guys are now. You know, can you agree with me? Who gave up Jacob to the looter and Israel to the plunderers? So whose fault is it? Okay? Whose fault is it that Israel is in captivity? Is it God's fault that they are in captivity? Second half of verse 24. Was it not the Lord against whom we have sinned? And this is interesting where Isaiah suddenly slips into this collective collective responsibility thing, just like Daniel does in Daniel chapter 9, just like Jeremiah does. This collective responsibility. We have sinned. So whose fault is it? Well, it's the nation of Israel's fault. So he poured out on him the heat of his anger and the might of his battle. It set him on fire all around, but he did not understand. It burned him up, but he did not take it to heart. So again, the Lord is condemning this idol worship thing, and he's trying to get this idea of idol worship out of the minds and hearts and beliefs of the Jewish people. All right, I'm going to stop there today just because of time, and I don't want to. I thought I'd get into 43, but apparently I'm not. So next week we're going to continue on talking about Isaiah chapter 43 and the different things that the Lord has done for them. So I appreciate your time with us today, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Side note here. Now, again, I sent an email note out about this. And that is that I have been asked to teach in our church's adult Bible fellowships, like Sunday school, to talk about Isaiah. Now, that's not going to affect this. I'm going to continue to put these messages out every week until we finish Isaiah and then go into Luke and all of that stuff. Okay, what I'm going to do in Isaiah in the class live is I'm going to just kind of start with Isaiah 1, and hopefully at some point they're going to sync up. We'll see if I ever get there. I don't know. So if you've been watching this and you're available in the Downers Grove area, Downers Grove, Illinois area, and you want to come by and you can say, okay, yeah, I just need some reminders. But then again, you can just go back into the YouTube page and watch the thing again. So that's all I got for today. Thank you very much. I do appreciate you being with me today, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.